Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Arthur Vaughn. I am the Health and Wellness Chair for the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta. And welcome to our next in our virtual health and wellness series. Tonight, we're going to be talking about your health is your wealth. And we'll be talking about estate planning with attorney Norman Thompson. He has an estate planning practice that focuses on helping families enhance their lives today and secure their futures tomorrow. Norman is a double graduate of Syracuse University, earning his undergraduate and law degree from Syracuse. He is a husband to Raquel and raising three wonderful daughters together, Brianna, Isabel, and Brooklyn. Norman will be our featured speaker tonight, and your host for this evening will be Mr. Julian Pouncy. Julian is a former president of the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta, but also our economic development chair. He's a financial advisor with Northwestern Mutual, where he does financial planning, estate planning, business planning, and investment services. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to our host, Julian Pouncy. As a little bit of housekeeping, please put your questions in the chat, and we will be monitoring and asking them throughout the program. But at this time, I'd love to turn it over to Julian. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks a lot, Art, and thanks everyone for being here tonight, taking the time out to discuss these very important topics. And hopefully we'll be able to bless you with some not only knowledge, but some action items that you may be able to take with you to share with your immediate circle, and also have hopefully an immediate effect. Positive effect on what's going on with your personal situation. So I'll jump right into it. The title of this is Your Health is Your Wealth. And oftentimes I found that people don't find or see the connection between the two. But one of the things that I want to impress upon you is that you must guard your health so that you can achieve your wealth. Things like a good diet, exercise, and sleep. We hear this stuff and it goes in one ear and out the other, but it's not a problem till it's a problem. And then an avalanche of problems sometimes will pursue after that. Then you've got the emotional and spiritual health. If you look at what happens in the world globally over the last 24 months, emotional wellness, spiritual wellness, people took for granted the ability to just gather and worship whatever denomination or whatever religion they wanted. That was all of a sudden threatened. Emotional health from being confined, lack of movement, lack of human interaction. Humans were not meant to be solo practitioners of life. We're meant to be in groups. It's part of us, and if we aren't able to achieve it, then of course we have an emotional consequence that we've seen manifested all around us. Another type of health, personal and business relationship health. All of that has been affected. And then your financial health. Last year when we were seeing food lines, and one of the things that struck me was that when the helicopters were hovering over different areas and they were showing the long lines that people were getting into for food, there were a lot of nice cars in those lines. So your financial health oftentimes is not what it seems, because just because you can have a nice house and a nice car, oftentimes there are things that are unpredictable that can affect all of this. So then there's healthcare disparities between the haves and the have-nots. Medical bills and high medical bills are one of the main contributors to bankruptcy. And not only that, financials in general are one of the main contributors to divorce. So, during the Great Recession, heart attacks and strokes increased at a phenomenal rate due to the financial stress brought on by the recession, which caught a lot of people unprepared for the financials and even on an estate planning standpoint as well. And financial stress is also one of the main contributors today. So to address some of this, I'm going to introduce you to a conversation-like forum between me and Norman, just addressing some of these things that I've mentioned and hopefully you'll have some takeaways, and some of the things we talk about will really, really connect with you so that you can be stronger moving forward. So given that, I'm going to jump right into it and start a conversation with Norman. And first and foremost, Norman, what is a will?
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks, 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta, for having me come on. This is a great thing that you guys are doing. I'm happy to have people on listening and talking about estate planning, because very few people do estate planning in general. Probably about 60% of the population don't have a will or anything related to estate planning. So I want to thank you. And also, to piggyback off what you just said, you know, I often used to say doctors save lives and lawyers save livelihoods. You can't, you know, it's a difficult life without either one. If you lose your home or anything like that, you know, a lot of people have unfortunately committed suicide because of financial issues and gone through stress that's caused them more physical issues. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. But to your question, what is a will? So basically, a will is a legal document that kind of memorializes your after death wishes. It's typically used to transfer assets, but it can also be used in some jurisdictions to name guardians for your children. And each state has specific requirements. It's not just a piece of paper that you sign. In most states, there are several things you have to do for it to be a valid will, and which includes having witnesses and sometimes a notary on the document itself. And in most states, you cannot submit a copy of a will for probate. So you have to keep the original will. You can submit a copy if you don't have the original, but you're going to jump through hoops to prove to the judge that it's the original. So, you know, basically, you have to keep that document in a safe place and let someone know where it is.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. So, you know, oftentimes when I'm meeting with clients, not so much my clients because I've already educated them, but I'm meeting with prospects who I'm considering for clients. And we talk about a lot of different things. And especially when I'm talking to some of the younger kids, they're saying like, well, I'm 20 years old. I don't have any kids. Why do I need a will? Why do I even need to think about estate planning, man? I'm young, I'm living. Why should I think about that? So Norman, why should they think about that?
So I would say that, you know, it's very important that once you reach the age of 18, in most states, that's the, you know, that's when you're considered an adult, that everyone have some type of estate plan. And just to specifically speaking about a will in general, right? Almost everyone has assets. You know, it may be jewelry, it may be art, it may be, you know, a video game collection, something. Everyone has assets. What happens to that? And if you don't specifically say who you wish to have these things, whether it's your parents, so on and so forth, and you have no will, then a court may decide that. And if you had a friend that you told that they would get your baseball collection when you were 17, you're now 18 years old, and it's a valuable collection, and they petition to the court and tell the court that you told them that, then now your family and your friend, and it could be a former friend, someone you don't like anymore, is fighting over your assets, right? So everyone has assets, but more specifically, when you're young, you also need other documents, and that's why I focus on estate plans versus just wills, right? So you're gonna need, at the very least, some type of healthcare proxy, because if something happens to you, you wanna specify who should make your medical decisions for you. It's not automatically your parents, and some people think that, but most states, you know, a judge would give credence to your parents, but it's best if you specify that. And also, if something happens to you and you become incapacitated, or, you know, you might be considered not able to take care of your own self and well-being, like Britney Spears was, and if you don't name a guardian, an adult guardian for yourself, then you can find yourself in what she had was a 13-year battle to regain her control over all her belongings, her life. She couldn't have kids, anything. So there's more that goes into it. And if for example, you're 18 even, and you own a car or a house or anything, and you have a bank account and you don't have power of attorney, you haven't given power of attorney to anyone, then they're going to struggle to get that, settle your, pay your bills, so on and so forth. Say, for example, if you become incapacitated for just a few months, you may be in a coma or something, you come back perfectly well, but now you have either your bills are behind or your stuff has been taken. So there's a lot of reasons why someone 20 years old would need to do some estate planning.
Okay, great, great. So, I mean, you touched on this a second ago, but I'm going to ask more directly. What's the difference between a will and an estate plan?
Yeah, so a will is just a part of an estate plan, and I described some of the documents that you may have in a comprehensive estate plan. Now, if you're an adult with young children, you may have guardianship papers named in your estate plan. You may not only have a will. You may have a will. You may decide to design a trust for yourself, and then again, you're going to have your healthcare documents. You're going to have your after-death wishes for burial. You want to have HIPAA waivers for anyone that may need access to your healthcare information. And then one of the most important things are power of attorney. So these are comprehensive information. And then an estate plan looks at all your total assets, looks at your entire life and your lifestyle, and tries to design a plan around that, not just your assets that you're leaving behind, but considering tax implications and other things.
Great, great. So, do you need an estate plan if you have no assets?
Yeah, I think I touched on that. If you have zero assets, an estate plan can cover a few things. So now estate plans vary. And so, if you have millions of dollars, obviously that's one kind of plan. And if you have no assets, that's another kind of plan. But the bottom line is, the documents that I just described, especially your healthcare documents, even if you're not rich and if you don't have any assets, you may want to name someone, to look over your healthcare, as well as a power of attorney for like your bank accounts. So even if you don't have a house, a car, anything like that, you may have a checking account that you may need to pay bills if something happens to you. And so naming someone to have power of attorney over that is helpful. And there are plenty of parents who don't have an asset like we consider like a house, a car, or something like that. And you may be renting, living in New York, and you take the subway, for example, so you don't need a car. But if you're a parent and you have kids, you definitely want to consider other documents to protect your kids if you're no longer around or you become incapacitated. It's not always death. Sometimes you're not able to take care of things yourself.
Excellent. Okay. So, as a group, African Americans currently earn more money than in the history of this nation. Plus, several have risen to like positions of middle management in major corporations, and they're positioned to go even higher. But even given all of that, the wealth gap is getting wider. You and I discussed that wealth gap a few weeks ago, when we were talking about the average net worth of an African American being somewhere in the range of 17 to 24,000, depending what your sources are. Whereas the average net worth of a white family is 10 times more than that. How can effective estate planning help to address that gap and closing that gap?
Well, I think two things come to mind when you ask that question. The first thing is insurance coverage, right? So a lot of people, you have assets and you have debt and so on and so forth, and a lot of people pass without considering like having insurance that will cover any debt that they have. Some people die. I think the famous rapper DMX died the other day, and people had to put money together to pay for his funeral. Mind you, it's an elaborate funeral, deserving of a superstar, but at the end of the day, he didn't have enough coverage to take care of his assets or what he left behind. And so, you want a comprehensive estate plan would consider whether you have enough insurance to cover your assets and your children and your family, and also what you want to leave behind, because you may in life have a net worth, you may in life accumulate a lot of assets that have debt associated with it. And, at death, it can all be worth not a lot if you owe a lot of money on it, right? So it'd be nice to have some type of insurance to help cover that. And then the second thing, right, that I like to talk to people about, when you do estate planning, right, and a lot of, first of all, you need to do an estate plan to begin with. And most African Americans, we don't even consider, we don't want to consider that we may pass away, right? And for different reasons, over the years, for some people it's taboo. And for me, as you just mentioned, the wealth is at its highest level now, but there was a time where we couldn't pass assets, right? And so I think some of this is, kind of passed down over generations. And then, we don't see estate planning as a tool to help allow the next generation to prosper. And if you don't do that, you can find yourself in the second part that I was going to mention, with some tax consequences that could wipe out some of your estate. So the two things would be, tax implications and making sure you have enough insurance. And a lot of other races do that. And that's why even if they didn't have a lot at death, they wind up passing on great wealth to their family members.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I often tell people is that we are only a generation or a generation and a half out of sharecropping. So a lot of these concepts from a cultural standard are new to us. We're that generation that is making more money, but some of those negative cultural aspects have followed us when it comes to our relationship with money, relationships to assets. We are more of a consumer-based culture, and we know how to make money. We really know how to make money, but we don't know how to turn that money and to keep that money. The analogy I often give is like we're running a 4x100 race. And every time you pass the baton to the next guy in the leg, you want to at least be neck and neck or have a lead. But too often when we get ready to pass the baton, when it's the end of our race, we either drop the baton, which is very, common with the U.S. Olympic teams, sprinters, or we do pass the baton, but everybody else is already 50 yards ahead. And so we spend so many years and generation after generation, rather than passing generational wealth, we pass debt. And everybody on here probably knows what I'm saying when I'm talking about passing the hat, because that pass the hat syndrome is just too prevalent. And even for those that do very well, the headlines are full of people, like you said, DMX and others, who made it financially, but they really dropped the baton when it came to preserving and passing that wealth. But it's not just us. It happens within the majority culture too. I'll tell you a very short Cliff Notes version of a story. Everybody knows about Wrigley's Field. That's a famous baseball field. It was owned by the Wrigley's company, who owned Wrigley's Chewing Gum. And Mr. Wrigley had always said that there would never, ever be a nighttime game played at Wrigley's Field. And that's back when, they first came out with the nighttime lights back in the 20s. Well, when he died without any estate planning, and his wife died within a year after him. And so in order to satisfy the tax obligations from that huge estate, his heirs had to take the company public because they owned Wrigley's Chewing Gum. So when they took it public, they sold shares of the company, and it still wasn't enough to satisfy the hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes they owed. So they also had to sell the stadium in order to make up the difference for the taxes owed. And they sold it to a new company, and that's why baseball is played at nighttime at Wrigley's Field. That's a true story. So improper estate planning, it stretches through the gamut. It affects everybody. And that's why being on top of it for your particular situation is actually so important. So, Norm, let's talk about the ramifications of improper planning when it comes to leaving lands to heirs. And I want to be more specific, African-American heirs, because there are some things that are going on right now. It was it was a major headline about 3 weeks ago, but due to improper deeding and estate planning when it comes to land in Black America.
Yeah, so I'll first touch on the subject itself, and then deal with what's happening with African Americans in general. But first of all, if you don't have an estate plan and you leave land to your heirs, they may not even know they have the land, and that's the biggest challenge with that situation, right? If someone doesn't know it exists, right, then two things may happen to that land, right? First of all, you may have a squatter on the land. Someone may, stay in the land long enough. So under that particular state law, they become the true owners, and then they can actually submit for and get a deed to that property. So you got to be careful, because a lot of times when land is left, it's in a remote location. It's not typically in the middle of Brooklyn, right? A lot of times people leave land, especially a lot of us have lineages to the south, right? It's left in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, places like that, where you're not likely to travel to on a regular basis, and so you may not go down there and ask questions, so to speak. So if you don't have that information in your will, then or in your estate plan, then it's going to either it can be squatted on, and then the other thing is it can go to the government eventually. There's a lot of unclaimed property in the United States right now. It's over $50 billion in unclaimed property. And the main reason for that is because the heirs don't know the property exists. Now, when it comes to African Americans, some people were responsible and tried to do planning in the past, especially coming out of the sharecropper days and so on and so forth. But the challenge is they, either whether it was mean-spirited or just lack of knowledge on the person's part, right? So you go to a lawyer who's mean-spirited back in the day when we weren't expected to have anything, right? And they improperly deed your documents, right? And now when you go later on, you may have a title company do the research all the way back to when the person who originally owned it passed, and find out that it was improperly deeded. And then there could be challenges to that deed over time. And so you don't want to get, unfortunately that situation happens. And then the other thing is, and it happens often, if you don't understand how that process works and you don't have an attorney or someone that can help you with it, then, again, there could be a situation where the deed is incorrect. And you haven't taken, there's ways in a lot of cases to take steps to get the deed in proper form, right? Prior to it being challenged. But if you don't take those steps ahead of time, then you may find yourself in a situation where you're trying to sell the property and someone says it's not really yours, or someone has claimed the property and redeeded it to themselves. So.
Yeah, those are all major issues that can make, if you have hair, it can make you pull what little hair you have left out.
Yeah, I don't have any left.
All right, well, let's talk about something else that all of us, I think, can relate to. Let's talk about the Brady Bunch. Let's talk about mixed families and estate planning for yours, mine, and ours.
Yes. So one of the major groups that I focus on are blended families. My family itself is blended as well. And, now I think the term we use is blended family versus mixed. But ultimately, if you don't know what that means, is as Julian described, it's, like the Brady Bunch, when a couple gets together from previous relationships, whether it be marriage or just having a child together, they bring their families together in a blended family. They get married and they have kids from another relationship, right? the big challenge there, and a lot of people don't think about this, is if you pass away and you, will or trust your belongings to your present spouse, right? Often we see what happens is prior children from other relationships are left out. And this could be, you know, sometimes intentional. Most of the time, if they don't, if your present spouse doesn't have a good relationship with your children, especially if they're adult children, some children they didn't raise themselves or lived in the house with them. Sometimes the spouse gets the money and says, "Hey, look, I don't care what anybody thinks. It's my money now, and I don't have to give it to you all, right? I don't have to give it to your kids. The person who passes away, they don't have to give it to their kids." And so you want to make sure if you have a blended family and that's something you want to leave something for your children, right? From a previous relationship, that gets documented well, because otherwise your children, and I see this often, the children are challenging the new spouse in court over what was left behind, and it's unfair to someone that's grieving to have to go through the situation, and then it may be a rift from the before, but if it wasn't a rift between the present spouse and your children from a previous relationship, then it's going to be a rift at that point. And so this is kind of situation you certainly want to avoid. And as the person making the estate plan, you can design it any way you want. You can leave some to your children, some to your spouse. You can design this anyway. I work with spouses. I just got a call the other day from a spouse that said, "Hey, look, I want everything to go to my adult child from a previous relationship and nothing to my current spouse." And I don't recommend that, but that's just what she wanted to do, and I had to document it. And her reason was that her relationship with her spouse is new. She's only been with the person for 2 or 3 years, and obviously she wanted to take care of her child. But so you can do that, and especially with assets that you had prior to the marriage. That in some states, once you get married, it's joined together. In a community property state, it doesn't even have to be in both their names. But in the majority of states, including Georgia, you can will any assets you have to anyone you want to will it to, or put it in trust for that person.
Great. This reminds me of a couple of stories that I'll share. Once again, I'm trying to throw in things that are real world things that really do happen. Years ago, when I was a group underwriter, I got a call from a hospital, and it was a call from a family member whose loved one was in the midst of passing away. I got a call from the new wife, and unfortunately, her husband, fortunately, he had a will, he had a estate plan, he had a lot of things done. But one of the things that he hadn't done was change some things beneficiary-wise before he ended up unconscious in the hospital. And they were wanting me to change the beneficiary before he passed away. Now, me, I empathized with them, but I had to just say, unless you all can wake him up, give him whatever that's going to jump him up and make him coherent, right, so that he can sign some stuff before the inevitable happens, my hands are tied. My hands are tied. I've gotten more than one phone call like that in my career. Nothing you can do. So this stuff, when you're talking about blended families, multiple marriages, I'm sure most people on here have at least 2 401ks. And a lot of times, so many years go by, you forget about that first 401k because you didn't roll it over, or you didn't do some stuff, and it's out there, out of sight, out of mind. Well, oftentimes the same thing happens when it comes to estate planning. That other spouse is out of sight, out of mind. You don't even like them. That's putting it lightly. You might not even like them, but you didn't change that document.
Yep.
Now your new loving cohorts and families, they're going to be SOL. Prime example, Steve McNair, when he was killed by his mistress. Steve didn't have a will and estate planning done. Plus he had outside children. It all went to probate to the state of Tennessee. This man had made hundreds of millions of dollars in his lifetime and was worth a gigamillion. He was worth a lot of money. It was nasty. That's all I'm saying. It was nasty. So you don't want to be in that particular pool of people. Now, and that's a good segue into this next one. You know, Norman, I shared with you a story about it's not a client, it's somebody I was talking to, but the one down in Florida where her parents had passed, and oftentimes they'll leave everything and control everything to one of their kids. And then that can sometimes cause rifts in the family. In this particular case, she left one daughter as executor of everything. The others felt some kind of way about it. They thought they should get the silverware or the paper cups or whatever, and ended up in fisticuffs being thrown. And you touched on this before when you're talking about how relationships can be irrevocable, you know what I'm saying, irrevocably changed and damaged. And the importance of what we're talking about to now, so that people can have the ability to grieve their loved ones, not fight over, you know, trinkets. Right. So, I mean, that stuff happens. I'm sure you see it more than I do, you know.
Yeah, you know, family feuds is a big part of this business, right? And I joke around, I think I shared this joke with you, you know, and it's on my Instagram. You know, where there's a will, there's 5,000 cousins, right? You know, and so, you know, you'd be surprised. People come out of the woodwork, right? To, you know, contest wills in ways that, you know, you wouldn't even imagine. A good example, I think one comes to mind, for example, when Kobe Bryant passed away the other day, right? That's about a year and a half ago now. Kobe Bryant passed away. His mother-in-law is suing his estate, so basically her daughter, claiming that they owed her money for taking care of the children, and that Kobe had promised her that she would get some of the money. And so, you know, I don't know the relationship between Kobe's wife, his widow, and her mother, but it seemed like it was a decent relationship at the time he passed. But decent relationships can turn really sour when there's $66 million involved, right? Or there's hundreds of $millions involved. I think his contract with Nike was about 60-something million dollars, right? So, and they're paying out some of it, right? And so, you know, people start to, people change when there's a lot of money involved. And I just got a call the other day from a client, and she said that her mom has, you know, power of attorney over her mother's brother, so her uncle's assets, and he just passed away. And he has two children that some 20 odd years ago, 21, I think she said, they tried to steal from him. So he wrote them off for good, right? But guess what? He didn't write a will, and he died without a will and without a spouse. And so guess who's next in the list, all right? If you die without a will, and you got to go through what we call the state's will, right? Or the state's plan for you. So if you die without a will, every state has a plan for you, right? And it may not be the plan you want. I'm pretty sure it's not. It's not going to cover your wishes in the way that you could if you documented it. And so now the children are the ones, even though he wanted his sister to have the assets, he left, I think, 200 and something thousand dollars in cash. And now the kids who he I won't say hate, but he you know, kind of shunned them because of what they did. They actually got arrested for trying to take stuff from him. And so, you know, now they have claims to this. And so her mother is gonna have to go to probate court and fight these kids for how it may be years. You never know how long this can take, right? So probate can take quite a long time. Right now, none of Aretha Franklin's kids have any of her assets, right? They're still in probate. That's 3 years ago. Prince is still in probate. That's like about 5 years ago now. So just to give you an example, and then family feuds can take on different forms. One of the famous stories, Anna Nicole Smith, right? She married that older guy, I believe he was 90 years old at a time where she was in maybe her 30s. And the guy died with a will, but the will didn't name Anna Nicole Smith in it. And she sued his estate, which was controlled by his oldest son, and said he promised me that I should get half of the estate. And through, you know, some documents, letters that he wrote to her, some of the staff that was around when he was dying and stuff like that, she brought people in to prove that that was his wishes. And she walked away with $450 million, but his kids and her were fighting. And then the worst case I've seen that I remember, I've seen a lot of bad cases, but this one was in the news. And so I try to use the ones that you might have known. I don't know if you guys have seen the case of Terry Shriver. Terry Shriver got, I think she had a massive heart attack and got into a persistent vegetative state. So the doctors, right, said that she will never, ever come back to normal. She's a vegetable. She can't think on her own. She's just living on machines, right? And at the time, this wasn't popular in estate planning, so I can't really fault the attorneys. But she left documents saying that she doesn't want a breathing tube, right? But medical science had advanced by that time, and they can keep her alive. She was able to breathe, but through food and hydration, she's able to stay alive. And so her husband said her wishes were that not to be kept alive if she's a vegetable. Her parents didn't believe him. They felt like he wanted to move on with his life. And by the time this all hit court, it might 2 or 3 years later from her death, from her incapacitation. And a couple of years later, maybe 2 years from the time she became incapacitated, rather. And, she could do certain things like her parents would walk in the room and she may raise a finger or do something or wink an eye or something. And the parents didn't quite believe in the medical science and felt like, no, she's alive, she can hear us, she understands us. But several doctors, they went through an untold amount of doctors. And over the course of 15 years, they depleted her estate, keeping her alive. And ultimately, a court decided that the husband was, through pillow talk and what have you, was the one that was correct and had the right to have her feeding tubes removed. And the case, was on national news. I think George Bush was president at the time. He got involved. It became a right to lie case. And so it went through a bunch of court, a whole bunch of lawyers, a lot of doctors, and a lot of hospital bills. And for what reason? If it was documented correctly, then, she would have been put to rest shortly after she became incapacitated. And then, they wouldn't have depleted the estate doing that. But the point I'm making is family can get into fight even when it's unintended. So my goal is always to keep you out of court and out of conflict. And, the best way to stay out of court is to avoid probate, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, and in order to allow for, we got a lot of questions that people asking, and we want to be able to address those. So I had a lot more questions. Maybe we'll save those for a rebroadcast or a second round of this, but I'm going to narrow it down to 2 questions to just elaborate quickly on. Number one, we always got that wingman, that ride or die, that we're saying, hey, if something happens to me, I want you to take care of my kids. I want you to address some of the things to consider before saying yes to that. And also, and the question of whether or not after your loved one passes, can the state in which they reside come back and recoup expenses for any nursing home or state care that was provided?
Okay, 2 good questions. And so if I forget the second one while answering the first, I'll cue you up to let me know. But I think the first one you asked was about, agreeing to become guardians for children. And that's probably one of the most popular topics, right? A lot of people in the past, they chose guardians, by choosing the richest relative, right? and often, you know, the richest relative got there because they didn't want kids and they didn't have kids, and it was easier for them to navigate the work world, right? If you don't have kids, you can work endless hours, you can do whatever you want to do, right? And kids cost a lot of money. So oftentimes the rich person in your family is the one that avoided the kids, right? And so naming them guardians of your kids might not be the best thing. But the reason why I started there is because, right, in deciding whether you should be guardian, like, you know, accept the duties, or whether as a parent you should name someone a guardian, are some of the same things, right, to consider. First of all, before you decide from either side, or you're a parent or you're going to be the potential guardian, you have to consider whether you have the same parenting style as each other, right? That includes disciplining, right? If you don't believe in beatings and you know, you're handing your child over to someone who believes in beatings, then chances are that your child is going to get a whooping, right? And that may be the last thing you want, you know, even though you're not here today. But if that's not what you want for your children, then you have to make sure that the person has, you know, a lot of the same parenting style that you does. Then another thing that comes up is religious beliefs, right? Are you on the same page in terms of religion, right? I've seen plenty of families, my best friend and his wife, one is Muslim and the other one is Christian, and they get along just fine, right? But there's situations, how do you want your kids to be raised, right? If you're Muslim, do you want your kids raised as a Christian, right? Do you want them to now convert and go to, or be raised as a Jewish person, right? And this is just a matter of choice, right? We chose our religion in life. You know, usually our parents chose it first for us, and then as we become adults, we decided whether we want to keep that or not. But religion is an important factor in everyone's life, and changing that midstream for kids who lost their parents could be pretty challenging for them as well, right? So you want to consider that. And then the other thing you want to consider is, where does the guardian live, right? If you're the guardian, do you want to accept someone, bring someone to another state, another school system, another world? And if you're the parent, same thing, right? Because you want to do this with the least disruptions to that person's life as possible. Remember, this is a person that lost, young person that lost both parents, obviously, because, or maybe, you know, whatever the last living parent, or they may not know the other parent, but for whatever reason, the last living parent isn't around anymore. So this has got to be a rough time for anyone. I mean, at my age, if my mom passes away, I'd struggle, right? So imagine that for younger kids who didn't have the time I've had with my parents. And so you want to, you know, consider where they live. And then the last thing, which really is the first thing when I speak to parents about this, is the cost of raising children, right? Do you, first of all, if you're the person that they're choosing, do you want to take on the expense of raising children? That could be a huge burden, especially if you have children of your own, if you don't have a house big enough, several factors, right? They got to go to school. They, you know, they need clothes and a whole bunch of other things. But what I say to people, and why I left it for last in this seminar, is that, you know, the financial responsibilities for children fall squarely on their parents. It has nothing to do with the guardian. So if you know a person that's otherwise perfect to raise your kids, right, you should make sure as a parent that you have, you know, the proper planning in place that will cover these children at least until they reach the age of 18. And typically what that involves, if you don't have large amount of net worth, would be insurance. And we talked about that a little bit before. You should make sure you have enough insurance coverage to cover your children until they reach 18. And sometimes, you know, you have to look at, if you can't afford the most expensive plans, at least accidental death and dismemberment insurance, those are typically cheaper, but, you know, as the very least, you should have that to cover your kids. And if you're the one that's being named, you should ask the parents, what have they done in terms of finance for their children for the future.
Thanks a lot. And in the interest of time, I'll forego that last question because now I want to open the floor up. You know, we have a great audience, and I really want to open up the floor for questions. I know a few people that I've spoken, they called me before this happened. They have some really relevant questions to throw at us. And Dr. Vaughn, let's
Yes,
go
sir.
that direction.
All right. Well, again, thank you all for coming today. I'm Arthur Vaughn. I am the Health and Wellness Chair for the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta. And if you have questions that you haven't already asked, please put them in the chat, and we're going to answer as many as we can before this session is over, and either Norman or Julian can answer any of them. Some of the things the three of us talked about last week. 2.5 years ago, I got unexpectedly ill. And there's decisions that have to be made in the hospital. And you guys alluded to it, but I'd like to get a little more detail. When there has to be medical decisions and somebody's in the hospital, Norman, you said documented. What does that mean? Are we advanced directives and all? What are those things that help people when decisions have to be made for a loved one that's in the hospital, whether it's your spouse or a parent? How are those things documented for the decision maker?
Yeah, so, the name of the document varies by state. Like in New York, it may be called a healthcare proxy, but you alluded to the other name, which is a healthcare directive, but they mean the same thing. They're pretty much a document that says who is responsible for my healthcare if I can't make the decisions myself, right? So if I become incapacitated for whatever reason, who is the person I would like, and remember, it's your wishes, I would like to make my medical decisions for me. And often people think your spouse is automatically that person. That is not true. And what could end up happening is the Terry Shriver case where your family is fighting it out in court. And you can name anyone you would like that you trust to be the person responsible for your health care.
All right. And Julian, the other night when we were talking, you were talking about a video option. Can you talk about a little bit of, Julian, about that video option you were mentioning the other night when the three of us were on?
Well, yeah, we're in the information age now, and technology allows us to enhance our estate planning in the form of leaving a video of your spoken word, your spoken vision, detailing your intents for those coming after you and for everything involved in those documents. That way, there's no arguing. There's no area for contention. It's like mom said she wanted me to have these ruby slippers. I'm getting them. And here's why. And if you're mad at somebody, be mad at me. Don't be mad at your sister because she got the slippers. Be mad at me. I'm gone. I don't care. So by leaving a video with your important documents, and then have a backup as well, because that's something that can't really be distorted. It cannot be corrupted. It cannot be distorted.
Okay.
I tell all my clients to do that now.
All right. So Rachel B says, my husband and I have separate accounts. What document would allow him access to my financial accounts in the event of my passing?
Yeah, so that's very important. And so you want to have a power of attorney naming whoever. It could be a husband, it could be a parent, sibling, what have you, naming that person responsible for your financial affairs, right? So a power of attorney is generally the document that's used to allow access to bank accounts and so on and so forth. And before I go, I want to make sure that we cover trust, because we talked a lot about wills, and I don't think a will is the end all be all. It's the minimum that you need. I always say to people, especially if you have assets. So
no, the two questions we have around trust, well, the first two I see, how do I know when I need a trust? And how do I establish a trust? Those were the very next two questions.
That's funny. See, that's good. Well, so how do you know you need a trust, right? So if you want to avoid probate, and and for different reasons you'd want to avoid probate. So probate, I'll go through it quickly because I know we have a lot of questions. So probate is public. It takes a long time. It costs money, and people can challenge it, right? If you want to avoid those things, you don't want your family fighting in court. A trust is the perfect way to avoid that. You don't go to court at all with a trust. All happens is the trustee carries out your wishes in the way that you would like it done. And it's cheaper, right? A trust is ultimately cheaper because the typical probate costs 3 to 7% of your assets, right, that are probatable. And all probatable assets are ones that are titled in your name. So bank accounts, houses, cars, that kind of thing, and also some of your personal assets. But the main thing, if you have a house and the house is $100,000, then you're looking at $3,000 minimum in probate costs, up to $7,000, depending on the state and the complexity. So that's just a house that's $100,000. Now, if you have $1 million house, you can do the math, right? 3% of that. So those are some of the ways you can know whether you need a trust or not. If you don't want your family information out there, you don't want your business out in public, you want to avoid the fights in court, and you don't want your kids to wait as long as Aretha Franklin kids have been waiting for access to her funds, right? Then you may want to consider a trust.
And the next question, Norm, is can you talk a bit about the different kinds of trusts, and can you roll your will into that trust?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I've never heard the can you roll your will into a trust. So a will and a trust are two separate documents. They, when you do estate planning with me, you get both if you do a trust plan, right? And so I do what's called a pour over will, which is just in case you miss any asset that's any asset, at least the will would cover that, right? But chances are I would have gone through everything with you over and over again, and I do it every 3 years for free. If you plan with me, we go over your assets over and over to make sure you don't miss anything, right? And so, you know, you don't transfer a will into a trust. They're two separate documents. They carry out the same thing. One is just public, takes a long time, costs more money, right? As I just mentioned before. And there's different types of trusts. I could not sit here and name every single one for you, but the two general different trusts are revocable trust and irrevocable trust, right? A revocable trust, you can put assets in and out. So you can put your house in it, your car, boat, whatever, into it, your bank accounts. And then later say, I don't like this trust, I'm gonna take it all out, right? So you can do that during your lifetime. Irrevocable trust, you can't do that. Like once you put the asset in, it stays in the trust. And you can't change the trust. And you can create that at any point. You can have a revocable one that turns into irrevocable when you pass. In fact, a lot of spouses pass on an irrevocable trust for the benefit of their spouse. And then that money goes on to their children when they pass, their half of the asset. And then the wife has a revocable trust in her name when they pass. So some people do it a different way. The difference between the two is the protections that they afford. Irrevocable trusts don't afford the same level of protection. And like I said, in the interest of the time, I can't describe it all, but a revocable trust affords you more protection against creditors, lawsuits, and so on and so forth. And the difference between the two is control, right? You don't have control of the revocable trust like you do in the other one. So no court can come and say, hey, look, you have to pay this bill because you just got sued. So basically, that's the layman's way of describing them. We'd have to talk a lot more to describe them better. Hopefully it's helpful.
All right. So what are your thoughts on pre-planning a funeral?
Everyone should do it, right? You're not going to die because you plan your funeral, right? And I tell people you're not going to die just because you do your estate plan, right? And so those things, you know, but it's important for people to know how you want things to happen after you pass. And I kid you not, just today I did a plan with a lady, and this is her wishes after she passed. She said that she wants to have a funeral first, right? And she wants it to be a party. And she wants the top house DJ in the country at the time. She has enough assets to do this, right? To, you know, play music at her funeral. And then after that, she would like to be cremated and split between her two kids the ashes. I'd never heard that before. You know, we're gonna have the top house DJ in the country play for me. But, you know, and I'm a DJ myself, but I never even thought about that. But, you know, it just allows you to say what you want to happen. Secondly, right, financially, you should plan for your funeral. You shouldn't leave that up to your children and you know, the people that you leave behind. You should try to plan for that, whether through insurance. There's plenty of insurance that cover burial and so on and so forth. So consider that in your overall estate plan as well.
All right. So Julian, you were going to jump to a question. Uh, I didn't
Yeah,
see,
I thought there was a question I saw from Dr. Carter. So I wanted to make sure we got to that one.
sure, I didn't see it, but while you're looking for that, I want to ask, you mentioned a POD on bank accounts. What does that acronym mean? All right, Julian?
That means pay on death. In my business, we call it transfer on death. The banks would normally call it a pay on death. And what I equip my clients with is, listen, when you have, if you're a person who has a bank account in your name only, and it's a taxable account, and it could be a taxable brokerage account too, not just a bank account. If you don't have something in place, either beneficiaries named on it or a TOD or POD, when you die, it goes to probate. However, if you have that form signed, and you can name one person or 100 people, but anybody who's on that form, if they come in there with a death certificate, they should have immediate access to your account.
Okay, cool. So can either of you discuss the pros and cons of hiring a probate lawyer?
Well, that would be more in the realm of our resident attorney.
Yeah, so actually the question is, what's the benefits of hiring? Is that the question you said, Arthur?
It says, discuss the pros and cons of hiring a probate lawyer. You can tell Norm's known me a long time. He just called me Artie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so Dr. Vaughn.
No, bro. I'm never that to you. Never, ever, ever.
But
Norm
yeah,
and I were freshmen in college together. I'm never Dr. Vaughn.
right. But you're still a doctor to me, though. I
Right.
appreciate your accomplishments in life. But you know, with regard to a probate attorney, it really depends on the situation. I got that question earlier today about whether the person should hire a probate attorney or not. It really depends on who the executor is that's handling the estate. So if you're very savvy and it's not a complicated estate, you're not going to face any tax issues. You don't have anyone challenging it. You know, most people can submit a will to probate, right? And you know, the people in the probate office will often help you, walk you through it. Sometimes they have fill in the blank forms that you go in and you just submit it to court. As long as there's no challenge to it, right, then you know you can get your will probated fairly quickly and move on with life. The challenge is, you know, if you have significant assets, then going to probate is probably a bad idea to begin with. You know, whether it's the tax ramifications, the time it'll take, and then you know, again, I said earlier, when there's a will, there's a 5,000 cousins. Sometimes you think no one's coming forward, and that's it's a bad bet sometimes. So just be careful there. If you're pretty good at if you've done certain things, for example, if you ever been to court on your own, like small claims court, that kind of thing, it's not a tough process in and of itself when there's not limited assets and no one challenging you. Hopefully that helps.
I think it did. And Tony, we want to make sure that your question was answered about the power of attorney and bank accounts, but I believe it was in the what term did Julian use, the
TOD or POD.
POD or POD, right?
That's different than a power of attorney, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's go ahead and let me ask her question so we're clear. She said she's the power of attorney or for her mother. Do you also need a joint account owner on her bank accounts? Does the power of attorney status give her access to her financial accounts?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So you don't need to be a joint on an account if you have power of attorney. And in fact, we used to say that a joint person on an account is the poor man's trust, right? So when the person passes, usually the person who's also on the account, typically spouses are on your account. My wife and I have joint account. They can do with the account because they're named on it, but they have to be a signature on the account, right? Not just someone that you just added to the account. They have to have, right to sign for things. Otherwise, it may not work. And so what I've seen lately, particularly in like the northern states, New York, New Jersey area, banks, when you're a joint person, they still sometimes freeze the account just to make sure all their ducks are in a row, because they don't want someone to come later and sue them because you took all the money out the account because you're the other person on the account. So your best bet to, allow your family members access to your account once you die is to have a power of attorney and have that with, you get the death certificate, you submit it to the bank and they'll give you access. Now, POD, as Julian described earlier, that can achieve the same thing, right? Because you're getting the money anyway, right? You can put that in any other account and use it at that point, right?
Sure. So we have another question. What forms would be necessary to have funds set aside for long-term medical care?
What forms would be necessary?
Yes, it says, what forms would be necessary to have funds set aside for long-term care, long-term medical care?
So long-term medical care is a different construct. It's not the same. The things that I talked about earlier in terms of your medical documents, those are the things that control who determines what happens to you if you can't make those decisions for yourself. You become incapacitated and someone has to make medical decisions for you, then that's the forms I alluded to earlier. Now, there are other mechanisms for protecting yourself in terms of financially if you have high medical bills, but that's in a whole nother area. That's similar to insurance. You can buy long-term disability. You can buy different kind of medical insurance, right, that pays out huge amounts if you accumulate those bills in life, right? But those all come with a premium. You have to pay a premium for those things, typically, unless your company has it.
All right. I want to respect everybody's time, right? So what I'd like to do is Norman and Julian, if you both would go into the chat, we want to make sure people can reach you if they need to. If each of you would put your contact information and any web sites or anything you want to share. So if someone has additional questions or want to reach you to do some financial planning or estate planning, they can definitely reach you. And also, I wanted to highlight our next session. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I had the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta's Health and Wellness Committee, but Julian heads our Economic Empowerment Committee. So next month, we're going to partner up and do another session on getting your financial house in order. And we're going to talk about financial literacy. So we're going to get down to some of the basics. Norman and Julian today, they had step 2 or 3 for us, right? But we want to make sure we understand the basics of financial literacy. And we're going to be holding a session next month on that, right? So as they're also putting it in, I'm going to put in the link for the North Metro 100 Health and Wellness page, because if you want, we've done this every month this year on a variety of health and wellness topics. And if you want to go see any of the previous videos of anything we've done in any of those topics, they're recorded and on that site. So I see that Norman and Julian have put their information in, but I want to give each of them an opportunity to share any closing remarks before we end for the evening, and also in advance, because I'll forget if I don't do this. I want to thank each of you for joining us this evening. There's any number of other things you could be doing on your Tuesday evening, but you chose to spend an hour with us to increase your literacy in this area or their information in this area. And also I want to thank Norman and Julian, because I'm absent-minded sometimes. All this gray is affecting my brain. But thank you all for your time as well and your expertise in this area. But again, Julian and Norman, if you would give us any closing words that you'd like to share, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Art. And what I want to begin by first of all, thanking everybody for being here, because it's a testament to the importance you're placing on this very subject, which is imperative for moving the wealth needle in our community. And via my role as a financial advisor and as chairman of Economic Empowerment, I intertwine the two platforms in order to do that to the best of my ability. This is all about moving the wealth needle in our community. And it's an often overlooked area because nobody wants to really talk about demise and things like that. but I encourage or I implore you to take to heart some of the things we talked about. Reach out to Norm, reach out to me, or reach out to somebody who can help you to help those coming after you. And it is possible to have your cake and eat it too. Through proper estate planning, financial planning, you can plan for the now and also be planning for those coming after you, so that you'll be mentioned in those stories about my great, great, great who left me this, that, and the other, who provided this lifestyle, this future lifestyle that you're at the foundation point right now providing. So once again, I thank you for your time.
Yeah, I also like to thank you all for attending. You've taken a very important step that most people don't even take, right? You know, estate planning is something that most people procrastinate about. And I have a quote that I have out there that says that no one dies without a will because they didn't think about it, right? So most people think about it, but they don't take even an inch like you did tonight. And hopefully some of the information that you've gotten will help move the needle even further. And I always say also, even if you don't plan with me, plan with someone. Have a will at the very least, right? So that your loved ones don't have to suffer through dealing with some of these issues that we've talked about when you're not around and they're grieving, right? And then the other thing is just something on myself. I do 3 levels of planning, right? So something for everyone. I don't charge by the hour. Each plan has their specific amount, and they don't really change. And I don't just focus on the documents that I told you. One of the things I do at the end of our planning time together is, you know, after I'm delivering your documents to you, what I do is do what's called a legacy interview. And I ask you questions on either video or audio that about your life and what you wish and so on and so forth. Things you like to tell your grandchildren, your children, if you're not around. And we preserve that in your documents, right? Usually by USB drive that I include in your documents. And then the very last thing is, I always try to entice people to do their estate plan. And again, you know, most of us think about it, but you know, we don't get around to it for whatever reason. So I put in a chat a link to my email address. And then if you email me the information I said, you know, your name and then use the code 100 Black Men, you can put that in the subject line. I will give you, you know, until the 15th of December, I'll give you $250 off your estate planning if you plan with me. So just to give you an incentive to move the needle a little further, because that's what I want for everyone. You know, that's why I got into this business, not necessarily. I was doing personal injury and criminal law before, but I found this because I really want to help people out towards the end of my career in a way that, you know, those other 2 didn't provide. So hopefully I've given you good information that you can use and that you'd want to talk to me about further planning.
All right. So we want to wrap up again, thanking everybody for coming, but also want to remind you that today's conversation is recorded. And as soon as we can, with competing priorities, it'll be posted on that same link. I shared the North Metro 100 website. I don't know why I couldn't remember. I told you the gray, but yeah, so it'll be up there so you can come back and review this at any time. Again, you have both Norman and Julian's information. But we'd like to, again, thank you all for spending a little bit of your evening with us. Thank you so much for coming. Visit us on Facebook, North Metro 100, the North Metro 100 Black Man page, and you'll see information on not only economic development, health and wellness, you'll also see our education and our mentoring information. So again, I'd like to thank you again for coming tonight, and we hope to see you next month for our Getting Your Financial House in Order next virtual conversation. Again, thank you all again. Norman, you'll hear from me before the 15th of December. And again, good night, and thank you all for coming.
All right, thank you all.
Good night, everybody.